So today I'm going to ask you a question. What do these fragrances all have in common? Angel by Mugler, Gucci Rush, Womanity by Mugler, Alien by Mugler, Because It's You by Emporio Armani, Insolence by Guerlain, and Miss Dior by Christian Dior. Well, all of these fragrances have all been rumoured to have been reformulated or are widely known to have been reformulated. But why does reformulation happen? And is it something that you should be upset about or worried about? So I'm going to try and answer those questions in this video. So you know what happens, you fall in love with a perfume and one day you go and repurchase a bottle, you get it home, rip the packaging off, you haven't tried it in store because you know how it smells, you use it all the time, you've used it for years. You try it and it just doesn't smell the same and you don't know whether it's because your perception is off or whether your old bottle was maybe slightly oxidised or had changed in some way, or whether the new perfume has been reformulated. And you will actually probably never know whether that new perfume has been reformulated because perfume houses are notoriously secretive about reformulations because they don't want to affect their sales. But really, it's a problem. It's because it is, one, unexpected, two, if it doesn't trigger that scent memory of your familiarity, it's going to just upset you. And three, it can be changing the fragrance for the worst. And that can be in terms of the quality of the ingredients, or it can be in terms of how it smells. So why are perfumes reformulated? Well, I can think of quite a few reasons, but probably the first one that I'm going to talk about is probably one of the least common reasons. And that is that a perfume is just not selling, or that the perfume company wants to relaunch it. And a great example of that for me is Miss Dior by Dior. So this fragrance was relaunched in 2012, it was relaunched in 2017, and it was relaunched in 2021. And each time the fragrance was modified in order to reflect changing tastes in perfumery. And if you're aiming your fragrance at a certain age bracket, which I think Miss Dior is probably aimed at around sort of the 20s and the early 30s, I would say, if you're aiming your fragrances at those age brackets, then those people are going to be very influenced by trends. So you're going to have to keep changing your fragrance to reflect current trends. And that's a really interesting kind of concept, really, in what Dior are showing to be their vision of the Miss Dior wearer. That's a really strange concept, and it annoys a lot of people because they fall in love with one formulation and then it disappears. But it makes a lot of sense from Dior's point of view because it constantly generates a new market for them. But yes, this is one of the ones where you can tell that it's been reformulated because they are just blatant about it. The bottles are nearly the same, but not quite the same. And the formulation of the fragrance is just, yeah, it's completely different. So it's just so in your face that they've changed this fragrance and they have huge relaunch campaigns as well. So this is a great example of the first one, that it's just not selling or they want to relaunch it. So other fragrances that have undergone little tweaks to kind of reflect changes in perfumery and taste are things like older scents, for example, Guerlain's Shalimar or Chanel No. 5. A second reason for reformulation can be ingredients. So either scarcity through them being natural resources or through socioeconomical kind of reasons, or it can be because the ingredients themselves are being banned. There's been some kind of regulation change. So for scarcity, a good example would be a reformulation of Chanel No. 19 when in 1979 there was the Iranian Revolution and galbanum, which comes from Iran mainly, was in really short supply, and Chanel had to do something because they just couldn't get their hands on that natural resource, which forced them into reformulating Chanel No. 19. So an example on the regulation change side of things would be changes in IFRA regulations. So the International Fragrance Association are a testing body that looks at allergens and perfumery and tries to work out the maximum amounts of different chemicals that can be put in perfumes that won't trigger allergic reactions. And they set out standards that their members, so different fragrance houses, abide by. They choose to abide by IFRA regulations. So if IFRA say that something is allergenic, then perfume houses get some warning and get told to reformulate their perfumes if they want to stay registered as an IFRA compliant body. And a great example of one of their major regulation changes was the fact that they limited oak moss to 0.01% in perfumes. And that meant that a lot of perfumes had to be reformulated. And actually a lot of perfume houses saw this coming and pre-reformulated their perfumes. So Chanel No. 5, for example, had to be reformulated as a result of the oak moss regulation change. So people get very upset with IFRA, and understandably, because how often have you ever heard of anybody having an allergic reaction to a perfume? I personally think it's quite low, but I do understand that some of the chemicals that were used in perfumery years ago were quite damaging, and some of them were carcinogenic. Some of them have effects on fertility, for example, the lily of the valley synthetic molecules. And so I can see why IFRA would be concerned about that, because they are trying to defend the reputation of perfume basically as a safe thing to use. But yes, I can see why people would be upset and think that IFRA are just, a bit of a busybody and should just mind their own business, because how often do you hear of people having allergic reactions to perfume? So the latest compound to be banned by IFRA is called Lilial, and that one will prompt reformulations of fragrances such as Hypnose, Amen, Alien EDP. This compound is in quite a lot of fragrances, so expect to see a wave of reformulations probably in the next coming year because of that ban on that chemical. The final reasons are concerned with company profits, and this is really the darkest and most upsetting reason for reformulation, really. So if you think about the cost of a typical designer fragrance, say it's £100 or $100, if you break that cost down, there have been numerous leaked reports of the amount of money that is actually the cost of the fragrance. And some reports put it as low as 2% of that $100 or £100. Which is really shockingly low, isn't it, when you consider how much money you pay for a fragrance and how much money there is actually spent on the actual perfume inside your bottle. It really isn't much at all. But if a company can see a saving on the fragrance and a new, cheaper synthetic chemical note comes out, and they think that they can maybe reformulate without too much difference, they might go for it, because they might save 50 pence. They might save 0.5% of that perfume's cost. And that is going to be pure profit for them. So you can see on a large scale why reformulation would be in the brand's favour if they can do it well. But I would argue that reformulation in some cases is going to be a lot more costly than perhaps the saving would merit. So I can't see that is also a reason that is genuinely a common one for perfume companies to reformulate, but I can see it in some instances. And the instances I can see it are things where the perfume company itself is taken over. So a great example of perfume company takeovers is Mugler. And we know what has happened with the Mugler brand, don't we? So Mugler fragrances were at one point made by Clarins. And then I think in early 2020, perhaps around March 2020, Mugler was sold to L'Oreal. And L'Oreal are notorious for being very profits driven and for discontinuing a lot of fragrances. So L'Oreal managed to get rid of a lot of the Mugler brand flanker perfumes, I think, but they also did a really striking reformulation of Alien, and that upset a lot of people and caught a lot of people off guard. So I have the 2020 version of Alien, and I also have a vintage refill bottle of Alien. And I would say that these are night and day. These are really not that similar, and I can understand that if someone was an old school hardcore fan of Alien, picking up this formulation would be a shock, because it is a really different perfume. So why would L'Oreal have reformulated Mugler's perfumes? Well, rumour has it that they didn't buy the formulations when they bought the rights to make the perfumes from Clarins. And that is just so odd, isn't it? Why would you start from scratch? Because Mugler is such an iconic brand and you're just going to upset a lot of people. Well, I think maybe the IFRA regulation changes maybe also had a play in this decision, perhaps because they probably saw changes coming in cashmere standards, for example, and they realised that they were going to have to reformulate potentially anyway. So maybe that's part of it. But yes, I think it was rather a short-sighted decision by L'Oreal. Another classic example is when Estee Lauder took over for Kilian. Estee Lauder bought them, and I don't know whether you remember all the hype over Love Don't Be Shy, but that was said to be Rihanna's fragrance, and I'm sure that caused a massive upsurge and a very sudden upsurge in sales. And in order to cope with that, they must have had to really up production of that perfume. And there was a very sudden change in how that perfume looked. So there are numerous videos on YouTube, I won't bore you with the details, but basically the perfume completely changed colour. And lots of people emailed Kilian, and by Kilian, owned by Estee Lauder, was saying, well, you know, you need to let this settle down and you need to let this perfume macerate and things like this. And people were getting really, really cross over basically something that was blindingly obvious because of the colour change of the perfume. But Kilian weren't owning up to this reformulation, basically. So yeah, reformulation is generally something that is hidden by perfume brands, and it can be really difficult to negotiate as a consumer. Another great example of fragrances being reformulated as a result of somebody else making the perfume is Lolita Lempicka fragrances. So Lolita Lempicka fragrances used to be made by Pacific Creations, and Pacific Creations lost the rights to make those fragrances, and Lolita Lempicka brand took over making their own fragrances, and they took the opportunity to reformulate their fragrances to make them vegan and cruelty free. And that is admirable, but they also upset a lot of people because they changed their fragrances, and some of their fragrances were really very, very much loved, I feel. So I think you are always going to alienate some of your customers as a fragrance brand with reformulations, no matter what the reasons. But the main thing is that you potentially attract new customers, and that can be beneficial for your brand, and can also result in cost savings, and can also mean that you are following IFRA regulations, which is going to be beneficial to your brand, because IFRA regulations are often the starting point for EU and US regulations. So should you worry about reformulations? Well, I think that's basically dependent upon whether you have one perfume in your life or a couple of perfumes in your life that you seriously couldn't live without. If that is the case, then if you're happy with the current formulation, go out and buy some backup bottles. That just negates any worry about it, doesn't it? That means that you will always have the perfume you love. And really, perfume keeps very well if it's sealed and out of the sunlight. So I think that's probably the best solution for that. And I think you just have to realise that the majority of perfumes out there have probably already been reformulated if they're over a year or so old, because reformulation probably happens a lot more than we think, and probably a lot of it is undetectable, which I think says a lot for the perfume industry. I think it says a lot for the people who make perfumes and perfumers that they can manage to do that. Humans are just resistant to change. They like things to be the same. And when things change, there's always suspicion. So I think that's really the reason why reformulations upset so many people. Ultimately, is it worth you searching them out? I think in the majority of cases, it probably isn't if you aren't someone who's had a long-term relationship with that perfume. I think to end on a positive note, that it's important to realise that reformulation doesn't have to be bad. So it's rare for sure that people appreciate reformulation, but that doesn't mean to say that reformulations in future can't be something that's positive. So please let me know what you think about reformulations, and if you own any fragrances that have been reformulated, and have had to rebuy any fragrances that have been reformulated and have experienced these issues yourself. Did it annoy you? Or did you actually like the reformulated version? Or could you not really tell the difference when people were going on about how different the reformulations were? I'd be really interested to know. So thank you very much for watching, and also please like this video if you have liked this video, and also please consider subscribing if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.